Right now, somewhere on this planet, a person is staring through a window. Another is reading a text message through a slab of hardened glass thinner than a playing card. Someone else is peering through a microscope at cells too small to see with the naked eye. And in an operating room on the other side of the world, a surgeon is threading fiber optic cable into a human body to light up what was once invisible. Every single one of these moments depends on the same material. A material most people never think about: glass. It is everywhere. It is in the lenses on your face, the screen in your hand, the bottles in your fridge, the mirrors on your wall, and the satellites orbiting over your head. And yet almost nobody stops to consider that this one substance, this peculiar, transparent, fragile, ancient material, fundamentally changed the trajectory of human civilization. Not once, not twice, but over and over and over again, across thousands of years. This is the story of glass, and once you understand it, you will never look through a window the same way again. Let us start at the very beginning. Before humans ever figured out how to make glass, nature was already doing it. When lightning strikes sand at extreme temperatures, it fuses the silica into jagged, hollow tubes called fulgurites. These strange, branching structures have been found buried in deserts and beaches all over the world, frozen records of the exact moment electricity met Earth. When volcanoes erupt and molten rock cools rapidly, the result is obsidian, a naturally occurring volcanic glass, so sharp that its edge can be measured in nanometers. Modern surgeons have actually used obsidian scalpels in experimental procedures because the cutting edge is finer than the best steel blade ever manufactured. Ancient humans discovered obsidian tens of thousands of years ago, and they immediately understood its value. It could be knapped into blades, arrowheads, and scrapers sharper than anything else available at the time. Obsidian tools have been found at archaeological sites dating back over 100,000 years. Entire trade networks formed around obsidian sources, stretching hundreds of miles across prehistoric landscapes. Communities that controlled obsidian deposits held enormous power, and chemical analysis of obsidian artifacts has allowed modern archaeologists to trace ancient trade routes with remarkable precision, revealing just how far prehistoric peoples were willing to travel for this material. But obsidian was found, not made. It was a product of geology, not invention. The real revolution came when someone, somewhere, figured out how to create glass from scratch. The exact moment that happened is still debated. The oldest known man-made glass objects date to around 3,500 BCE, found in regions of Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt. These were not elegant vessels or clear windows. They were small, crude beads, lumps of colored glass, often blue or green, made by heating sand with plant ash and naturally occurring minerals. The process was likely discovered by accident. Potters firing ceramics in kilns may have noticed that certain sandy materials, when exposed to intense heat, fuse together into a smooth, glassy substance. Metal workers smelting copper ore may have seen glassy slag forming as a byproduct. However it happened, humans realized they could take sand, heat it to extraordinary temperatures, and create something entirely new. Something that did not exist in nature in that form. Something transparent, something moldable, something beautiful. For the first 1,500 years or so, glassmaking remained a luxury craft. Glass objects were rare, expensive, and reserved for the elite. Egyptian artisans developed a technique called core forming, where they would shape molten glass around a core of clay and dung, layering colorful trails of glass over the surface to create small vessels for perfumes and oils. These pieces were treasures. Pharaohs were buried with them. The famous blue glass headrest found in the tomb of Tutankhamun is one of the finest surviving examples of ancient Egyptian glasswork. It is over 3,300 years old, and its color still glows. But glass was still a material of decoration, not function. It had not yet begun to reshape how humans lived or thought or saw the world. That transformation required a single invention, and it came from Rome. Sometime around the 1st century BCE, glassblowing was invented along the eastern Mediterranean coast, likely in the region of modern-day Syria or Lebanon. This was not a small improvement. It was arguably one of the most important technological breakthroughs in the history of materials. Before glassblowing, every glass object had to be painstakingly shaped by hand, cast in molds, or built up layer by layer. The process was slow, labor-intensive, and expensive. Glassblowing changed everything. A craftsman could now gather a blob of molten glass on the end of a hollow iron pipe, blow air into it, and inflate it into a bubble. That bubble could be shaped, stretched, flattened, cut, and molded into virtually any form. Suddenly, glass production became fast, it became scalable, and most importantly, it became cheap. Within a few decades of its invention, glassblowing spread across the Roman Empire. Glass went from being a luxury for kings to a household material for ordinary citizens. Romans drank from glass cups. They stored food in glass jars. They installed glass panes in the windows of public baths and wealthy homes. Archaeologists have found glass fragments at nearly every Roman site ever excavated. The empire ran on glass in ways that are easy to overlook. But the Romans also did something else with glass that would prove far more consequential. They started experimenting with its optical properties. Roman writers like Seneca noted that a glass globe filled with water could magnify text. He wrote that letters, no matter how small or dim, could be made larger and clearer when viewed through such a sphere. Nero reportedly watched gladiatorial games through a polished emerald, likely a concave gem that corrected his nearsightedness. Pliny the Elder described glassmakers in Sidon and Alexandria with a tone of admiration, cataloguing the varieties of glass being produced across the empire. These observations about magnification and light bending were curiosities at the time, little more than parlor tricks and footnotes in encyclopedic works. But they planted a seed, the idea that glass could bend light, that it could change what the human eye could see, would eventually detonate into one of the most important chains of discovery in human history. But that detonation would take over 1,000 years to arrive. After the fall of Rome, glassmaking in Europe entered a long, slow period of transformation. The craft did not die. It migrated. It evolved. In the Byzantine Empire, glassmakers continued many Roman traditions, producing intricate mosaics and luxury vessels for the imperial court. Tiny glass tesserae, many of them backed with gold leaf, covered the interiors of Byzantine churches, turning walls and ceilings into shimmering fields of color and light. But it was in the Islamic world where glass truly flourished during this period. Glassmakers in Damascus, Cairo, and across Persia refined techniques of cutting, enameling, gilding, and luster painting, producing some of the most exquisite glass objects the world had ever seen. Mosque lamps made of enameled glass, decorated with intricate calligraphy and geometric patterns, were prized across the entire Muslim world and beyond. Islamic scholars also preserved and expanded upon Greek and Roman writings about optics. The great polymath Ibn al-Haytham, working in Cairo around the year 1000, wrote his monumental book of optics, which laid the foundations for the modern understanding of how light behaves and how the human eye works. He was the first to correctly explain that vision works by light entering the eye, not by rays projecting outward from it, as earlier Greek thinkers had proposed. His work would later be translated into Latin and would profoundly influence European science for centuries. Meanwhile, in Northern Europe, glass found a new purpose: churches. The great cathedrals of the medieval period demanded light, and not just any light, colored, symbolic, narrative light. Stained glass windows became one of the defining art forms of the Middle Ages. Artisans developed techniques for adding metallic oxides to molten glass to produce vivid reds, blues, greens, and golds. They cut and assembled thousands of individual glass pieces into enormous compositions depicting biblical scenes, saints, and theological concepts. The result was architecture that doubled as storytelling. For a largely illiterate population, stained glass windows were a primary medium of religious education. Walk into Chartres Cathedral in France, and you are stepping into a building where the walls themselves are designed to teach, to awe, and to transform light into meaning. Glass was no longer just a material. It was a medium of communication, a technology of persuasion. But the most consequential chapter in the European history of glass begins on a small cluster of islands in the Venetian lagoon. In 1291, the Republic of Venice ordered all of its glassmakers to move their furnaces to the island of Murano. The official reason was fire safety. Glass furnaces were dangerous, and Venice was a city built on wood. But the real reason was control. Venice wanted to protect its glassmaking secrets, which had become some of the most valuable trade secrets in Europe. Murano glassmakers were treated as both national treasures and prisoners. They were forbidden from leaving the island without permission. Those who tried to flee and share their techniques with foreign powers risked assassination. The stakes were that high because the Venetians had achieved something no one else could reliably replicate. They had learned how to make Cristallo, an exceptionally clear, nearly colorless glass that was the closest thing to true transparency the world had ever produced. Previous glass had always been tinted, cloudy, full of bubbles and impurities. Cristallo was different. It was luminous, it was pure, and it unlocked possibilities that cloudy glass never could. Now, here is where the story of glass intersects with the story of human knowledge, in a way that most people never fully appreciate. Sometime in the late 1200s, in northern Italy, someone combined two pieces of curved glass and mounted them in a frame that could sit on the bridge of the nose. The exact inventor is lost to history, though the innovation is most often attributed to artisans in Florence or Venice. What they created was the first pair of eyeglasses. And this seemingly modest invention changed the intellectual trajectory of Western civilization. Consider what life was like before eyeglasses. The average person's close-up vision begins to deteriorate around the age of 40. For most of human history, this meant that scholars, scribes, craftsmen, and anyone else who depended on detailed visual work had roughly 2 productive decades of adulthood before their eyes began to fail. After that, their careers were effectively over. Eyeglasses doubled the intellectual working life of every literate person in Europe. Suddenly, a scholar could continue reading and writing into his 60s or 70s. A master craftsman could continue doing precision work for decades longer than before. The accumulated effect on European learning and productivity was enormous, even if it is nearly impossible to quantify precisely. Some historians have argued that the invention of eyeglasses was a critical precondition for the Renaissance, the explosion of art, science, literature, and philosophy that swept through Italy and then Europe in the 1400s and 1500s depended on a population of thinkers and makers who could see clearly well past middle age. And that was only possible because of glass. But glass had more to give, much more. In the early 1600s, in the Netherlands and in Italy, lens grinders began experimenting with combinations of glass lenses arranged in tubes. The first crude telescopes appeared in the Netherlands around 1608, likely invented by spectacle makers like Hans Lippershey, who recognized that stacking lenses in a tube could make distant objects appear closer. Word of this invention spread rapidly across Europe. The results were 2 instruments that would fundamentally redefine the boundaries of human perception: the telescope and the microscope. In 1609, Galileo Galilei heard about the Dutch invention, built his own improved version, and pointed it at the night sky. What he saw changed everything. He saw mountains and craters on the moon, proving it was not a smooth, perfect celestial sphere as Aristotle had taught. He saw 4 moons orbiting Jupiter, proving that not everything in the heavens revolved around the Earth. He saw the phases of Venus, which could only be explained if Venus orbited the Sun. He saw countless individual stars in the Milky Way, revealing that what appeared to the naked eye as a faint band of light was actually a vast collection of distant suns. Each of these observations was a direct challenge to the prevailing model of the universe, which placed the Earth at the center of everything. Glass lenses, ground and polished by hand, gave Galileo the evidence he needed to argue that the Sun, not the Earth, was the center of the solar system. This was not just an astronomical insight. It was a philosophical earthquake. It relocated humanity from the center of creation to a small rocky planet, orbiting one star among billions, all because someone figured out how to curve a piece of glass. At the same time, microscopes were revealing an equally astonishing hidden world in the other direction, not outward, but inward. Robert Hooke, the English polymath, published his masterwork Micrographia in 1665, filled with breathtaking illustrations of everyday objects seen under magnification. A flea became a terrifying armored creature. The edge of a razor became a jagged mountain range. A thin slice of cork revealed tiny, repeating chambers that Hooke called cells, the first time that word was ever used in biology. But it was Antony van Leeuwenhoek, a Dutch draper with no formal scientific training, who pushed the microscope to its most revolutionary extremes. He ground his own tiny glass lenses with extraordinary precision, achieving magnifications of up to 270 times, and used them to observe things no one had ever imagined existed. He saw bacteria, he saw red blood cells, he saw sperm cells, he saw the teeming invisible ecosystem inside a single drop of pond water, which he called little animals. His observations, reported in detailed letters to the Royal Society in London over several decades, opened an entirely new domain of biology. Before the microscope, the smallest unit of life that humans could perceive was roughly the size of a flea. After it, the entire microbial world became visible, and eventually, that visibility would lead to germ theory, antibiotics, vaccines, and modern medicine. Glass did not just change how humans saw the stars. It changed how humans understood disease, life, and death itself. The 1700s and 1800s saw glass become an industrial material on a massive scale. The development of plate glass, produced by casting molten glass onto flat iron tables and then grinding and polishing it smooth, made large, clear window panes commercially viable for the first time. This transformed architecture. Before plate glass, windows were small, expensive, and often distorted. Buildings were designed around the limitations of available glass. Once large, flat, affordable panes became available, architects could reimagine what a building could be. Light flooded into homes, shops, and factories. The great glass and iron exhibition halls of the 19th century, most famously the Crystal Palace, built in London in 1851, were monuments to the possibilities of industrial glass. The Crystal Palace was essentially an enormous greenhouse, a building made almost entirely of glass and iron, covering over 900,000 square feet. Nearly 14,000 exhibitors from around the world displayed their wares inside it. It was the physical embodiment of an age that believed technology could solve every problem. And glass, that ancient, simple material, was its defining substance. But glass was not finished transforming the world. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, glass became central to the new sciences of chemistry and physics. Laboratory glassware, beakers, flasks, test tubes, condensers, and pipettes was essential to the practice of experimental science. The ability to create sealed, transparent, chemically inert containers allowed scientists to observe reactions, measure substances, and isolate compounds with a precision that would have been impossible without glass. The development of borosilicate glass, which could withstand rapid temperature changes without cracking, was a critical innovation. Without it, much of modern chemistry and pharmacology would have been far more difficult, if not impossible. Glass also played a starring role in the communications revolution. The incandescent light bulb, perfected by Thomas Edison in 1879, depended on a glass vacuum bulb to protect the glowing filament from oxygen. Without that sealed glass envelope, the filament would burn up in a fraction of a second. Edison tested thousands of materials for the filament, but the glass bulb itself was equally essential. It was glass that made electric light practical, and electric light rewrote the rhythms of human life, extending productive hours deep into the night and transforming cities into glowing landscapes of activity after dark. The cathode ray tube, which powered television screens for most of the 20th century, was a glass vacuum tube. Radio valves, which made wireless communication possible, were glass. Even the earliest computers depended on glass vacuum tubes as switching elements before the invention of the transistor. The modern era of instant global communication was built, in large part, on the ability to shape and seal glass into precise forms. And then came fiber optics. The idea of guiding light through a transparent medium had been demonstrated as early as the 1840s, when the Swiss physicist Daniel Colladon showed that light could travel along a curved stream of water, bending with it through total internal reflection. But it took over a century before that principle was applied to glass in a practical way. In the 1960s and 70s, researchers at Corning Glass Works and at laboratories in Britain and Japan developed methods to draw ultra-pure glass into fibers thinner than a human hair and transmit light through them over enormous distances with minimal loss of signal. The key breakthrough was reducing impurities in the glass to almost unimaginably low levels. Even tiny traces of contamination would absorb the light and kill the signal over long distances. Once that purity was achieved, the results were extraordinary. A single glass fiber could carry thousands of telephone conversations simultaneously, far more than any copper wire. This was the breakthrough that made the modern internet possible. Every time you load a web page, stream a video, or send a message, the data travels through an underground and undersea network of glass fibers stretching millions of miles around the planet. Submarine cables made of bundled glass fibers crisscross the ocean floors, connecting continents. The backbone of the information age is not silicon, it is not copper, it is glass. The same material that Mesopotamian craftsmen were shaping into crude beads 5,000 years ago is now carrying the sum total of human knowledge around the globe at the speed of light. And the transformations have not stopped. The glass in your smartphone screen is not the same glass that Romans blew into drinking cups. It is a highly engineered material called aluminosilicate glass, strengthened through a chemical ion exchange process that makes it remarkably resistant to scratching and shattering. Companies like Corning have spent decades perfecting this material, and its latest iterations can survive drops onto hard surfaces that would have destroyed earlier glass compositions. This ultra-thin, ultra-tough glass is what makes the modern touchscreen possible. Without it, the smartphone as we know it simply would not exist. Glass is also at the forefront of renewable energy. Photovoltaic solar panels are encased in tempered glass that protects the silicon cells from weather while allowing sunlight to pass through. The efficiency of a solar panel depends in part on the optical clarity and durability of its glass cover. As the world accelerates its transition away from fossil fuels, glass is quietly playing a central role in the energy systems of the future. Even in medicine, glass continues to push boundaries. Glass microspheres are used in targeted radiation therapy for liver cancer. Bioactive glass compositions can bond with human bone and are used in surgical implants and dental repairs. Glass ionomer cements are a staple of modern dentistry. The material that ancient Egyptians used to make jewelry is now being engineered at the molecular level to heal the human body. There is something almost philosophical about the story of glass. It is a material born from sand, one of the most common substances on Earth. It requires nothing exotic to produce, just silica, heat, and a bit of ingenuity. And yet, from that humble origin, it has enabled an astonishing chain of consequences. It gave us lenses, and lenses gave us science. It gave us windows, and windows gave us architecture. It gave us mirrors, and mirrors gave us self-reflection in the most literal sense possible. Before glass mirrors, the only way to see your own face was in the surface of still water. Polished metal mirrors existed, but they were dim and distorted. Venetian glassmakers in the 1500s and 1600s developed techniques for coating flat glass with a reflective amalgam of tin and mercury, creating mirrors of unprecedented clarity. For the first time in history, ordinary people could see themselves clearly and in detail. Some scholars have argued that the widespread availability of mirrors contributed to the rise of individualism in Western culture, the idea that each person is a distinct, visible, knowable self. Whether or not you accept that claim entirely, There is no denying that the mirror changed the relationship between humans and their own image. It gave us fiber optics, and fiber optics gave us the internet. It gave us screens, and screens gave us the modern world, for better and for worse. What makes glass truly extraordinary is not any single property. It is the combination. It is transparent, so we can see through it. It is moldable when hot, so we can shape it into anything. It is hard when cool, so it holds its form. It is chemically inert, so it does not react with what it contains. It can be colored or left clear. It can be made paper thin or inches thick. It can focus light, split light, block light, or transmit light. No other material on Earth offers this combination of properties, and no other material has been so consistently, so quietly, so profoundly consequential. The next time you pick up your phone, or look out a window, or put on a pair of glasses, or take a sip from a glass bottle, consider the chain of events that connects that moment to a nameless artisan in ancient Mesopotamia, staring into a kiln, watching sand turn into something impossible, something clear, something new. Something that would, in time, change everything. Most people walk through life surrounded by glass and never give it a second thought. But now you know the story. And once you know it, you start to see it everywhere. Not just the material itself, but the way it shaped the world around you. Science, medicine, communication, architecture, art, energy, computing. Glass is woven into the fabric of nearly every major human achievement of the last 5,000 years. It is the invisible material that made the visible world possible. If this story surprised you, or if it changed the way you think about something you see every single day, hit the subscribe button and leave a like so more people can find this video. And drop a comment telling me which part of the history of glass you found most surprising. I read every single one.